Formula One. I mean, it's the absolute peak of motorsport, right? You've got genius engineering and just unbelievable driver skill all smashing together at over 200 miles per hour. But have you ever wondered how it got here? How did a bunch of scrappy post-war European races turn into the massive, high-tech global show we see today? Well, that's what we're going to do. Let's dive in and trace that incredible history. All right, so to really get a grip on the story of F1, we're going to break it down into 6 key eras. We'll kick things off way back at the beginning, with the birth of Grand Prix racing. Then we'll jump into the huge tech revolutions that changed everything, see how these incredible dynasties were built, and then we'll wrap up by looking at where the sport is headed next. Okay, so first up, laying the foundation. You gotta understand, before there was ever a thing called Formula One, racing was, well, it was a wild west of scattered, incredibly dangerous, high-stakes road races all over Europe. This is where the very DNA of the sport was forged. So the road to an actual Formula One championship was a long one, believe me. The world's first ever motor race, all the way back in 1894, from Paris to Rouen. And for the next, 50 years or so, racing was just this collection of one-off Grand Prix events. Think teams like Alfa Romeo and Bugatti battling it out. It wasn't until after World War II that the FIA, the governing body, finally stepped in and said, okay, we need a single set of rules. They called it Formula 8 at first, but in 1950, they renamed it Formula One, and bam, the first official world championship race kicks off at Silverstone. The sport we know and love was officially born. All right, so now we've got an official championship. This first real era of F1, the Age of Pioneers, was really shaped by 2 things. One absolutely dominant driver, and one revolutionary idea that would literally change the shape of every single F1 car from that point on. The sport's first real superstar has to be Juan Manuel Fangio. This guy was just on another level. And get this, he won 5 world titles in the 1950s, driving for 4 different manufacturers. Alfa Romeo, Ferrari, Mercedes, Maserati. He just jumped in and won. That kind of adaptability is something you just don't see today. He was the original benchmark for greatness. So while Fangio is out there dominating on the track, there's this quiet revolution happening in the garages. See, in the 50s, all the cars were front-engined. The big, heavy power plant was right there in front of the driver. But then some clever British teams like Cooper and Lotus came along and asked a really simple but brilliant question. What if we just move it to the back? And oh my God, it changed everything. Suddenly you have this lighter, much more balanced car that was an absolute monster through the corners. It was a total game changer. And guys like the legendary Colin Chapman of Lotus, they took this idea and just ran with it. His whole philosophy was simplify, then add lightness. He was obsessed with shaving off every single gram he could. It was this focus on lightweight design and better balance that really cemented the rear engine car as the way to build a Formula One car. There was no going back. Okay, so now we're heading into the 70s and 80s, and this is where Formula One really starts to look like the sport we recognize today. It stops being just a sport of mechanics and becomes this high-speed science lab on wheels. And this whole scientific revolution was basically driven by 2 massive breakthroughs: aerodynamics and just raw, untamed power. So that first breakthrough, it's a word you hear all the time in F1, downforce. The idea is actually pretty simple, but its effect is just mind-blowing. Teams figured out that if you put wings on the car and shape the body like an upside-down airplane wing, you could use the air itself to push the car onto the track. It literally creates an invisible force sucking the car to the ground. And what did that do? Well, it meant the cars could go through corners at speeds that should have been physically impossible. More downforce means more grip, and more grip means you can just carry insane speed. This obsession with aerodynamics that started back in the 70s, it's still, without a doubt, the single most important part of making an F1 car fast today. And then came the 80s, the turbo era. Oh man, engineers figured out how to strap these enormous turbochargers onto tiny little engines, and they created these fire-breathing monsters that were pushing out well over 1,000 horsepower. These were, and still are, the most powerful F1 cars in history. It was just a wild time. It gave us legendary rivalries, Prost versus Senna, and the sport's popularity just exploded thanks to global TV. The drivers became absolute superstars. So as the technology got more complicated and the money got bigger and bigger, we entered a new phase in the 90s and 2000s. The age of the dynasties. This is where one team, with the right driver and a huge budget, could just lock in and dominate the sport for years at a time. And you have to start with the first great modern dynasty, Michael Schumacher and Ferrari. From 2000 to 2004, that red car was just a force of nature. They were practically unbeatable, reeling off 5 straight championships. It was this perfect storm of brilliant strategy, flawless execution, and of course, a once-in-a-generation driver. Next up, the Red Bull dynasty. From 2010 to 2013, it was their turn to be unstoppable. You had the design genius of Adrian Newey paired with the blistering speed of a young Sebastian Vettel, and that combination delivered 4 straight titles. Just dominant. And if you thought that was dominant, what came next was on a whole other level. This was probably the most dominant run in the entire history of the sport. When the new hybrid engine rules came in for 2014, Mercedes they absolutely nailed it. They went on to win 8 consecutive Constructors' Championships. Lewis Hamilton grabbed 6 of those drivers' titles, with his teammate Nico Rosberg snagging the other one in 2016. But, running in the background of all these dominant eras was a really crucial and tragic evolution. The death of the great Ayrton Senna back in 1994, it was a horrific moment. But it became a massive turning point. It was a wake-up call for everyone, and it forced a complete top-to-bottom overhaul of safety. The standards they put in place back then are the reason drivers today can walk away from huge crashes and push these cars to the absolute limit. And that brings us right up to the current era. After so many years of Mercedes at the top, Formula One decided it was time to hit the big red reset button. They brought in a massive rule change, all with the hope of shaking up the grid and, most importantly, creating closer, better racing. So in 2022, they brought back an old-school aerodynamic idea called ground effect. Now, without getting too technical, the whole point was to design cars that create less dirty air behind them. And why does that matter? Because it means cars can follow each other much more closely without losing performance, which in theory leads to more side-by-side, wheel-to-wheel racing. And yeah, one team definitely figured it out better than anyone else, but it absolutely set the stage for a brand new era. And that new era, it absolutely belongs to Max Verstappen. After that incredibly dramatic, down-to-the-last-lap title win in 2021 against Lewis Hamilton, he and Red Bull just mastered these new regulations. His seasons in 2022 and 2023 were just breathtakingly dominant, some of the most commanding performances the sport has ever witnessed. And yep, he kept that momentum going to secure his 4th straight title in 2024. But, and this is a big but, here's where the story for the future gets really interesting. Even though Max won the driver's title in 2024, his team, Red Bull, did not win the Constructors' Championship. That prize went to a resurgent McLaren, who just barely beat out Ferrari. What does that tell you? It tells you the pack is closing in. It's a huge signal that the era of one team just running away with everything just might, be over. So where do we go from here? After more than 70 years of constant evolution, what does the next lap for Formula One actually look like? Well, the future isn't some far-off thing. It's already here. Look around. The sport is bigger and more global than it has ever been, with a jam-packed 24-race calendar that crisscrosses 5 continents. There's also this massive push towards sustainability, with really ambitious goals to be carbon neutral by 2030. And maybe most excitingly, that new generation of talent we've been watching, guys like Lando Norris, Charles Leclerc, Oscar Piastri, they aren't just up-and-comers anymore. They are proven, bona fide race winners, and they are hungry to fight for championships. So that leaves us with the big question, doesn't it? The grid is getting tighter, there are new regulations just around the corner, and there's a whole new crop of superstars ready to make their mark. So who do you think is going to be the one to step up and define the next great era of Formula One?